What would you do if saving one tortured alien queen could prevent the genocide of 60 million people? When Captain Jalen Vos blasted through that prison wall, he had no idea his reckless rescue mission would trigger the most dangerous infiltration in galactic history, or that a single quantum virus could bring the galaxy's most powerful fleet to its knees. But here's the question that will haunt you. Was the price they paid worth 60 million lives? And what happens when a human and an alien queen fall in love while the universe burns around them? Stay tuned to find out how one man's refusal to walk away changed the fate of an entire galaxy. The neural probe bit deep into Queen Nyrixa's skull for the ninth straight day. What had once been luminescent azure skin, the crown jewel of Draxari royalty, now hung gray and lifeless against rusted shackles. Her silver hair matted with blood and sweat clung to a face that had forgotten what hope looked like. The interrogation chamber reeked of ozone and burnt flesh. "The coordinates, Your Majesty!" Commander Varnak's voice dripped with mock reverence as he adjusted the probe's intensity. "Where is Admiral Korvax hiding your precious rebel fleet?" Nyrixa's vocal cords were raw from screaming, but her eyes, those fierce golden orbs that had once commanded fleets across 3 star systems, still burned with defiance. "Go to hell!" Varnak smiled, his scarred hegemony uniform bearing the insignia of 1,000 conquered worlds. "Hell is where I send others, my dear queen. You're simply visiting purgatory." He cranked the neural amplifier to maximum. Electricity coursed through Nyrixa's nervous system like liquid fire. Her back arched against the restraints, tendons straining, a guttural scream tearing from her throat that would haunt even hardened soldiers. When the current stopped, she hung limp, breathing in ragged gasps. Varnak leaned close, his breath hot against her ear. "This is your last chance. Tell me where Korvax is hiding, and I'll make your death quick. Stay silent." He gestured to a larger device being wheeled in a quantum disruptor that would fry every nerve ending simultaneously. "And I'll spend the next week teaching you new definitions of agony." Nyrixa raised her head, golden eyes meeting his with the last flicker of her royal bearing. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth as she spoke each word, a deliberate act of rebellion. "I'd rather burn in your hell than betray my people." Varnak's face twisted with rage. "So be it." He reached for the disruptor's activation switch. "Goodbye, Your Majesty. Your precious rebels will follow you soon enough." His finger hovered over the control. Boom. The entire chamber shook. Emergency lights bathed everything in hellish red as chunks of reinforced durasteel exploded inward. Through the smoke and debris, a figure emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with lethal precision through the chaos. Varnak spun around, drawing his sidearm. The stranger's plasma rifle spoke first. Varnak crumpled, his final expression one of complete shock. Queen Nyrixa, barely conscious, watched through blurred vision as her mysterious savior stepped into the light. Human features, she realized with amazement. Dark hair, steel gray eyes, and a face carved from granite and determination. "Looks like I'm just in time," the human said, his voice carrying a slight Earth accent she'd only heard in old diplomatic recordings. He holstered his weapon and moved to her restraints. "Let's get you out of here, Your Majesty." As the shackles clicked open, Nyrixa collapsed forward. Strong arms caught her before she hit the floor. She looked up into those steady gray eyes, confusion mixing with desperate hope. "Who are you?" The human smiled grimly as more explosions echoed through the facility. "Name's Jalen Vos, and right now I'm your ticket to freedom." Alarms screamed through the Hegemony detention facility as Jalen Vos moved like death incarnate through the corridors. His tactical vest was scorched from the breach charges, but his movements remained precise, each step calculated, each shot deliberate. 2 guards rounded the corner, pulse rifles raised. Jalen was faster. Twin plasma bolts dropped them before they could squeeze their triggers. He didn't even break stride. "Impressive," came a voice from the shadows behind him, though unnecessarily loud. Jalen spun, weapon trained on a figure in a dark cloak. The stranger raised empty hands, pulling back his hood to reveal sharp features and the unmistakable pale skin of someone who spent most of his time in artificial light. "Easy, Captain. I'm on your side." The man's accent carried the crisp pronunciation of hegemony nobility. "Kalen Strick's intelligence division. Though my superiors don't exactly know I'm here." "A spy." Jalen's grip on his rifle didn't waver. Why should I trust you? Because without me, you'll never make it out of this sector alive. Kalen gestured toward the detention block. I've been feeding your rebel contacts intel for 2 years. Who do you think told them where to find the Queen? Jalen studied the man's face, the tired eyes of someone carrying too many secrets. The slight tremor of hands that had signed too many death warrants. After a heartbeat, he lowered his weapon. Fine, but if you're lying, you'll kill me. Yes, I gathered that from your reputation. Kalen's smile was razor thin. Now shall we collect our Queen? My clearance codes won't fool the security algorithms much longer. They moved swiftly through the facility, Kalen's authorization bypassing several checkpoints, while Jalen handled the guards who asked too many questions. Within minutes, they were back at the interrogation chamber. Nyrixa had managed to sit up against the wall, but her legs couldn't support her weight. The torture had taken a brutal toll, muscle atrophy from 9 days of confinement, neural damage from the probe's dehydration that left her skin paper thin. Can you walk? Jalen asked, kneeling beside her. I can try. Her voice was barely a whisper, but determination flickered in those golden eyes. No need. Without hesitation, Jalen scooped her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, a reminder of how close to death she'd come. Save your strength. As they moved through the corridors, Nyrixa found herself studying her rescuer's profile. There was something about humans that had always fascinated her, their stubborn refusal to accept defeat, their willingness to charge headlong into impossible odds. But this one was different, controlled, professional. Why? She whispered against his ear. Why risk everything for me? Jalen's jaw tightened. Because someone has to. They reached the facility's outer perimeter as the first wave of reinforcements arrived. Kalen had hotwired a security speeder, its engines already humming. Transport's 3 clicks north, he called over the noise. My ship's waiting at the old mining station. The speeder rocketed across the barren landscape, Hegemony patrol drones screaming overhead like metallic vultures. Pulse cannon fire lit up the night sky, forcing Kalen to weave between rocky outcroppings as they raced toward the rendezvous. There, Jalen pointed to a squat, battle-scarred freighter sitting in the shadow of an abandoned ore processor. The Revenant. The ship was a patchwork of mismatched hull plates and jury-rigged systems, the kind of vessel that looked like it should have fallen apart years ago, but somehow kept flying through sheer bloody-mindedness. She's not much to look at, Jalen admitted as they sprinted up the loading ramp. But she's fast when she needs to be. The engines roared to life as the first patrol ships crested the horizon. The Revenant lifted off in a storm of dust and debris, climbing hard toward the atmosphere. Pursuit drones closing fast, Kalen reported from the co-pilot's seat. They're trying to get missile lock. Not today. Jalen's hands flew over the controls with practiced ease. The freighter rolled hard to starboard, diving toward a canyon system that would mask their heat signature. Hold on. The ship bucked and weaved through the narrow gorge, scraping against stone walls as drone fire lit up the rocks around them. One lucky shot clipped their port engine, sending sparks cascading through the cargo hold. Jump coordinates locked in, Kalen announced. Hyperspace in 10 seconds. The stars elongated into lines of light as the Revenant leaped into the safety of hyperspace, leaving the Hegemony pursuit far behind. In the sudden quiet that followed, Jalen finally had a chance to properly examine Nyrixa's injuries. He'd set up a makeshift medical bay in one of the cargo holds, basic but functional. This is going to hurt, he warned, running a bioscanner over the neural probe wounds. I've had worse, she said, then immediately regretted the lie as he began cleaning the wounds with practiced efficiency. You're lucky, he said, applying surgical tape to close a particularly deep cut. Another hour and the neural damage would have been permanent. Nyrixa watched his hands work steady, gentle, despite their obvious strength. You've done this before. Field medicine was part of the job. Back when I was... He paused, something dark crossing his expression. Back when I worked for people like them. But not anymore. No, his voice carried the weight of old regrets. Not anymore. She caught his wrist as he reached for another bandage. Their eyes met gold meeting gray, and for a moment the war outside ceased to exist. Thank you, she said simply, for giving me hope when I had none left. Jalen covered her hand with his. Don't thank me yet, Your Majesty. The real fight's just beginning. 48 hours after the breakout, the galaxy knew their faces. Jalen stared at the holographic newsfeed flickering across the Revenant's main display, watching his own mugshot rotate in 3 dimensions beside the crimson terrorist banner. The bounty dialing underneath made him whistle low, 10 million credits, dead or alive. 15 for me, Nyrixa observed dryly, noting her own reward. Despite 2 days of Bacta treatments, she still favored her left side where the neural probes had done their damage. Apparently, royal blood inflates the price. The news anchor, a perfectly sculpted hegemony propaganda puppet, delivered the official narrative with practiced outrage. The escaped war criminal, known as Queen Nyrixa, aided by the human mercenary Jalen Vos, and unknown conspirators, has been designated a priority 1 threat to galactic stability. Kalen emerged from the ship's communication array, his face grim. It gets worse. They're not just painting us as criminals, they're calling this an act of war by the Rebel Alliance. Every bounty hunter, merc company, and privateering outfit in 3 sectors will be scrambling for those rewards. The propaganda reel continued, showing footage of the destroyed detention facility. They had made it look like a small army had attacked not one pissed-off human with explosives and attitude. Burning wreckage, crater-marked walls, the twisted remains of guard towers, all presented as evidence of unprecedented terrorist brutality. "They're scared," Nyrixa said quietly, watching Admiral Corrin's stern face fill the screen as he promised swift justice. "Good. Scared people make desperate choices," Kalen warned. He activated a secure holographic projector, displaying a classified star map that made both his companions go rigid. Which brings me to why I really disappeared from Hegemony intelligence. The map focused on a remote system in the Outer Rim, coordinates that appeared nowhere in official star charts. For good reason. It was the most closely guarded secret in Rebel space. "Draxa Prime," Nyrixa breathed, her face going pale. "How did you Operation Cleansing Dawn?" Kalen said, his voice heavy with the weight of classified horrors. "I've been tracking their intelligence gathering for months. They found it, Your Majesty, your hidden homeworld. The location is compromised." The hologram zoomed in, revealing a massive fleet formation in hyperspace, tracking inexorably toward the secret refugee world where 60 million Draxari had rebuilt their civilization after the first conquest. When Nyrixa's voice was barely a whisper. 10 days, maybe less. The display highlighted ship classifications: dreadnoughts, heavy cruisers, assault carriers, 60 capital ships, 300 support vessels. And this. The projection focused on a single massive vessel at the fleet's heart, bristling with communication arrays and quantum processing cores that dwarfed even the largest hegemony battleships. "The Triumvirate," Kalen continued. "Fleet command vessel. Every ship in that armada will be slave to its tactical computers. Real-time coordination, predictive battle algorithms, perfect communication, synchronization. It's a technological masterpiece designed for one purpose: absolute annihilation." Jalen studied the ship's specifications with a tactician's eye. "Crew complement, 30,000, elite units only, Captain Mordek commanding." "The Butcher of Corridon," Nyrixa whispered, her golden eyes wide with horror. Everyone in Rebel space knew that name. Mordek was the architect of the Corridon massacre, 3 million civilians executed for the crime of harboring Rebel sympathizers. He didn't believe in prisoners' negotiations or mercy, just total extermination. "He's been given carte blanche," Kalen added grimly. "Complete orbital bombardment, atmospheric poisoning, biological warfare if necessary. The hegemony wants to make an example that will end the rebellion permanently." The weight of it hit them like a physical blow. 60 million people, men, women, children, who had already lost everything once, who had spent years building new lives in hidden corners of space, all marked for death by a madman with unlimited firepower. "There has to be something," Jalen said, pacing the cramped bridge like a caged predator. "Some weakness, a way to stop them." Kalen manipulated the display, highlighting the Triumvirate's central core. "There is, theoretically. The fleet coordination is managed by a quantum AI matrix. It processes tactical data from every ship simultaneously, creating perfect battlefield awareness." "And if that system fails," Nyrixa asked, "chaos. 60 ships trying to coordinate without a central brain becomes 60 ships operating blind. No real-time intel, no synchronized attacks, no predictive algorithms." Kalen's smile was sharp as a blade. "Your Admiral Corvex might actually have a fighting chance." Jalen had stopped pacing. "Might. Corvex has 40 ships on a good day," Kalen said bluntly. Even disorganized, those are still terrible odds. But it's a chance, Nyrixa said, straightening with the bearing of someone who had commanded fleets. The only chance my people have. Jalen looked between them, the exiled queen and the turncoat spy both staring at him with desperate hope. He thought about the refugee camps on Draxari Prime, the children who had never known their original homeworld, the elderly survivors who couldn't endure another displacement. "All right," he said finally. "How do we infiltrate the most heavily defended ship in Hegemony space?" Kalen pulled up another set of file supply manifests, personnel rotations, security protocols. Very carefully, the triumvirate launches from Nexus Station in 8 days. Until then, they're taking on final provisions and specialized personnel. Medical staff, Nyrixa observed, noting the transfer schedules. Exactly. I still have active clearance codes, and medical transports receive lighter security screening. We forge credentials, upload a virus to the central AI core, and extract before they launch. What kind of virus? Jalen asked. Kalen produced a data crystal no larger than his thumbnail. Quantum cascade algorithm. It'll propagate through their entire network within minutes, corrupting tactical subroutines and introducing random delays in communication protocols. The fleet will tear itself apart trying to coordinate. The silence stretched as they contemplated the enormity of what they were proposing. 3 people against 30,000 aboard a ship designed to be impregnable. If we're caught, Nyrixa said quietly, they won't just kill us. They'll broadcast our executions across every world in hegemony space as a warning. And if we succeed, Jalen has added, we'll be the most wanted fugitives in galactic history. No safe harbor anywhere. Kalen nodded slowly. I've been running from my conscience for years. Maybe it's time to run towards something worthwhile instead. Nyrixa extended her hand toward the center of their small circle, palm down. For my people. Jalen placed his hand over hers without hesitation. For everyone who can't fight back. Kalen completed the beyond, his touch surprisingly steady. For the chance to sleep without nightmares. Outside the viewport, hyperspace streamed past in ribbons of distorted light. Somewhere ahead lay Nexus Station, where they would either save 60 million lives or die in the attempt. Course laid in, Jalen announced, moving to the pilot station. 6 days to reach Nexus Station. That gives us time to prepare. And pray, Nyrixa added softly. I stopped believing in prayer a long time ago, Kalen said. But maybe it's time to start again. The Revenant's engines hummed with renewed purpose as they changed, heading toward their date with destiny. Behind them, the hegemony propaganda machine continued its work, turning heroes into villains and hunters into prey. But ahead lay something more valuable than safety or comfort, the chance to stand between tyranny and innocence, to prove that 3 determined souls could change the fate of millions. The most dangerous gamble in galactic history had begun. The hegemony medical transport, Mercy's Call, drifted powerless in the asteroid field, its crew unconscious from Kalen's precisely administered sedatives. No permanent damage, they'd wake up with headaches and gaps in their memory, nothing more. Feels wrong, Jalen muttered, securing the unconscious pilot. These are medics, non-combatants. They chose to serve the regime that's about to commit genocide, Nyrixa replied, though her voice carried no conviction. She understood his reluctance. Targeting healers violated something fundamental in both their moral codes. They'll live, Kalen said pragmatically, uploading forged personnel records into the ship's manifest. Which is more than we can say for 60 million Draxari if we fail. The transformation took 6 hours. Nyrixa's distinctive azure skin required careful application of synthetic pigments and holographic scramblers to pass as a pale Centaurian medic. Jalen's weathered features needed less work. Medical technicians came from all backgrounds, and his calm competence under pressure would sell the disguise. Remember, Kalen coached as they approached Nexus Station's massive bulk, your trauma specialist being transferred to handle combat stress casualties. The Triumvirate's crew has been running live fire exercises for weeks. Psychological breakdowns are expected. Nexus stations sprawled across space like a metallic cancer, docking bays, refueling depots and supply warehouses, connected by a maze of transit tubes. At its heart, the Triumvirate waited like a sleeping leviathan, its hull bristling with enough firepower to crack planets. Medical transport, Mercy's Call requesting priority docking. Kalen transmitted with the bored efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. We have specialists for the Triumvirate's psychiatric evaluation program. Copy that, Mercy's call. Proceed to Medical Bay 7. Clearance codes check out. Too easy, Jalen thought. But then why would anyone suspect a medical transport? They were the galaxy's untouchables. Attacking healers was considered an atrocity even by hegemony standards. The docking procedure went smoothly. Their forged credentials passed automated screening, and the tired-looking dock supervisor barely glanced at their faces before authorizing transfer. "Welcome to Nexus Station," he said, stamping their digital permits. "Shuttle to the Triumvirate departs in 30 minutes. Try not to piss off Commander Vex, she's been in a mood all week." They made their way through the station's sterile corridors, medical bags concealing their weapons, and the quantum virus. Hegemony personnel hurried past, focused on their duties, paying no attention to 3 more medics in a sea of support staff. The shuttle ride to the Triumvirate felt eternal. Jalen counted security checkpoints 17 between the docking bay and the ship's medical deck. Each one a potential exposure point, each scanner a chance for their disguises to fail. "Identification," the Triumvirate's security chief demanded as they disembarked. Commander Vex was exactly what Central Casting would order for a hegemony officer. Sharp features, cold eyes, and the kind of rigid posture that suggested she'd been born standing at attention. Kalen stepped forward smoothly, producing their forged documents. "Lieutenant Commander Strick's Intelligence Medical Division. These are my specialists, Dr. Kira Vos, and technician Marcus Cole." Vex's scanner beeped green as it verified their credentials, but her eyes lingered on Kalen's face, and Jalen felt his stomach tighten. Recognition flickered in her expression. "Strix," she said slowly. "I know that name." "I get that a lot," Kalen replied with practiced boredom. "Common surname in the core worlds." "No." Vex stepped closer, her hand drifting toward her sidearm. "Academy class of 2387. You were 2 years ahead of me. Graduated summa cum laude, fast-tracked to Intelligence Division." Her smile was predatory. "What are you really doing here, Kalen?" The moment crystallized like ice. Jalen's hand moved toward his concealed weapon, but Kalen caught his eye with the slightest shake of his head. "Commander Vex," Kalen said, his voice carrying the authority of superior rank. "I'm conducting a classified psychological evaluation of fleet readiness. Unless you want to explain to Admiral Corrin why his flagship's security chief is interfering with intelligence operations." The bluff was magnificent, delivered with the perfect mixture of irritation and bureaucratic menace that made hegemony officers back down. Vex hesitated, clearly wrestling with conflicting instincts. "Your orders," she demanded. Kalen produced another document, its holographic seals glittering with apparent authenticity. "Psychiatric evaluation protocols authorized by Fleet Command. We're here to assess combat stress indicators before the Draxari Prime operation." Vex studied the orders, her scanner confirming their digital signatures, but suspicion still darkened her features. "I'll be watching you, Strix. Step out of line and I'll have you in a detention cell before you can blink." "Noted," Kalen replied mildly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to do." They were escorted to the medical bay by a junior officer who chattered nervously about the ship's impressive facilities. Jalen nodded and made appropriate sounds while internally mapping security positions, emergency exits, and potential choke points. The Triumvirate's interior was a maze of interconnected decks, each one a fortress in miniature. Blast doors every 50 meters, security cameras at every junction, patrols of armed guards maintaining constant vigilance. Getting to the central AI core would require more than luck. "Primary evaluation suite is here," their escort announced, gesturing to a sterile medical facility. "Command core access is restricted, but I can arrange temporary clearance if needed for your assessment." "That would be helpful," Kalen said. "We need to observe crew interactions with command systems to evaluate stress responses." 2 hours of bureaucratic maneuvering later, they had their access codes. The command core lay 12 decks down, protected by multiple security layers and monitoring systems that would make a paranoid android nervous. "Time to earn our pay," Jalen muttered as they descended through the ship's belly. The AI core chamber was a cathedral of technology, quantum processors arranged in geometric patterns, data streams flowing like digital waterfalls, the soft hum of machines that thought faster than biological minds could comprehend. At its center sat the primary interface, a crystalline structure that pulsed with inner light. "Beautiful," Nyrixa whispered, "and terrifying. 5 minutes, Kalen warned, connecting his datapad to the quantum virus crystal. Security sweeps run every 10 minutes, and I can't delay them indefinitely. Jalen began the upload, his fingers dancing across holographic interfaces with the precision of someone who'd cracked secure systems before. Progress bars crawled upward as terabytes of malicious code infiltrated the AI's neural pathways. 40%, he reported. 60. Almost there. Alarms shrieked through the chamber. Emergency lights bathed everything in hellish red as blast doors began cycling shut. Secondary monitoring protocols. Kalen snarled, his face pale. They've been tracking unusual data flows. We triggered a silent alert. How long? Nyrixa demanded, drawing her concealed weapon. 90%, Jalen said, refusing to abandon the upload. Just need 30 more seconds. The blast doors burst open. Security teams flooded in, pulse rifles raised, and targeting systems painting deadly red dots across their bodies. Step away from the interface. Commander Vex shouted, her own weapon trained on Kalen. I knew you were up to something, you treacherous bastard. Upload complete, Jalen announced, yanking his datapad free as the virus disappeared into the AI's quantum matrix. The firefight erupted instantly. Nyrixa and Jalen dove for cover behind processor banks as pulse fire scorched the air where they'd been standing. Kalen drew his sidearm and returned fire, his shots precise and deadly. This way, he shouted, gesturing toward a maintenance shaft. But as they sprinted for the exit, a pulse bolt caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into a control panel. Kalen! Nyrixa started toward him, but he waved her off. Go! Someone has to confirm the virus worked. Blood streamed down his arm, but he managed to reload and fire again. I'll buy you time. We're not leaving you, Jalen snarled, laying down covering fire. You are. Kalen's voice carried the authority of a dying man's last order. Get to the extraction point. That's a direct command. More security teams poured into the chamber. Kalen positioned himself behind the central interface, using its crystalline structure as cover, while he fired methodically at anyone who tried to advance. His face was pale from blood loss, but his aim remained steady. Tell them, he called over the gunfire. Tell them we kept our promise. Jalen grabbed Nyrix's arm and pulled her toward the maintenance shaft as Kalen's covering fire intensified. The last thing they saw was the intelligence officer standing defiant against impossible odds, buying their escape with his life. The maintenance tunnels were a nightmare of cramped spaces and uncertain directions. Behind them, the firefight raged on pulse fire, shouted orders, the distant sound of blast doors sealing sections. They crawled through darkness toward an uncertain salvation, carrying the hope of 60 million souls and the weight of a friend's sacrifice. The virus, Nyrixa gasped as they reached a junction. Did it work? Jalen checked his datapad, relief flooding his features as confirmation codes scrolled across the screen. It's in, spreading through their network now. The fleet coordination is compromised. They had done it. At the cost of everything they cared about, they had given the rebels a fighting chance. Now they just had to survive long enough to see if it mattered. The maintenance tunnel shook as another explosion rocked the triumvirate's hull. Jalen dragged Kalen through the cramped space while Nyrixa cleared debris ahead, her medical training evident as she constantly checked their wounded comrade's pulse. Stay with us, she whispered, applying pressure to the pulse wound in his shoulder. The bleeding had slowed, but his skin was pale as starlight. We're almost out. No, Kalen gasped, his voice weak but determined. Listen to me. The signal. I transmitted coordinates before we boarded. Korvax knows when to attack. Through the hull plating, the distant rumble of ship engines grew louder. Not the triumvirate systems, but something else. Something approaching fast from hyperspace. The rebel fleet, Nyrixa breathed, understanding flooding her golden eyes. Jalen's datapad chimed with virus confirmation codes. Across the ship's network, quantum cascades were propagating through every system, corrupting tactical subroutines and introducing random delays into communication protocols. The triumvirate's perfect coordination was becoming chaos. They reached a junction where the maintenance tunnel intersected with an emergency airlock. Beyond, the transparent aluminum viewport space erupted in brilliant flashes of light. Sweet Mary and Joseph, Jalen whispered, using an old Earth curse his grandfather had taught him. 40 Draxari warships had dropped out of hyperspace directly above Nexus Station, their sleek hulls gleaming like silver knives against the starfield. At their head, Admiral Corvex's flagship Retribution opened fire with everything it had. The Hegemony fleet tried to respond, but the virus was already doing its work. Ships that should have moved in perfect formation now wandered like lost children. Communication arrays sparked and failed as quantum errors cascaded through their networks. Targeting systems locked onto friendly vessels instead of enemies. "It's working," Nyrixa said, watching a Hegemony dreadnought fire on its own escort frigate. "The coordination matrix is collapsing." But the triumvirate itself was fighting back. Emergency protocols had isolated core systems from the infected network, and Captain Mordek's elite crew was manually coordinating their massive ship's defenses. The command vessel's primary batteries spoke with voices of thunder, each shot capable of vaporizing a cruiser. "Hangar Bay 12, Kalen said, consulting a schematic on his failing doodapad. "Medical shuttles. Requisitioned for combat evacuation. We can steal one." They crawled through service ducts as the ship shuddered around them. Emergency klaxons wailed continuously now, and they could hear running footsteps in the corridors, crew racing to battle stations, damage control, teams responding to system failures, security forces searching for the saboteurs. The hangar bay was chaos. Technicians scrambled to launch fighters while officers shouted conflicting orders into dead communication systems. Perfect confusion was their ally now. There, Jalen pointed to a sleek medical shuttle sitting unguarded in the launching queue. "Fast courier design, we can outrun their fighters." They made it halfway across the hangar floor before someone noticed. "Intruders in Hangar 12. The security alert echoed through the vast space. "Lock down all vessels." Blast doors began descending as armed guards converged from multiple directions. Jalen and Nyrixa sprinted for the shuttle, supporting Kalen between them, but it was clear they wouldn't make it in time. "Go," Kalen said, stopping abruptly. "I'll hold them." "Like hell," Jalen snarled. "We're all leaving together." "Look at me." Kalen's voice carried surprising strength despite his wounds. "I'm bleeding internally. Even with the medical treatment, I've got maybe an hour. But if I stay..." He drew his sidearm with his good arm. "I can buy you 10 minutes. Maybe more." Pulse fire erupted across the hangar as Hegemony guards took positions behind the landing struts and cargo containers. Kalen returned fire immediately, his shots precise despite his injuries, intelligence training at its finest. "The shuttle," he shouted over the gunfire. "Get to the shuttle." Nyrixa grabbed Jalen's arm as he hesitated. "He's right. This is his choice." They ran for the medical courier as Kalen provided covering fire, moving between positions with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent years in hostile territory. His pulse rifle spoke with mechanical precision. One shot, one target down. The shuttle's engines were already warming as Jalen sealed the hatch behind them. Through the cockpit viewport, they could see Kalen taking cover behind a fuel depot, systematically picking off guards who tried to advance. "Launching now," Jalen announced, powering up the engines. "Wait!" Nyrixa opened a communication channel. "Kalen, we're ready for pickup." His voice came back steady despite the gunfire crackling in the background. "Negative. The hangar's too hot. Get clear and complete the mission." "We're not leaving you." "Yes, you are." There was finality in his tone. "Tell them? Tell the families on Draxa Prime that their children will see tomorrow, because today 3 people kept a promise." The hangar's magnetic field flickered as the shuttle lifted off. Through the barriers, they could see the space battle raging in all directions. Draxari fighters weaving between confused Hegemony formations. Capital ships trading devastating broadsides. The beautiful and terrible dance of naval warfare. Behind them, Kalen's voice came one last time over the comm. "Give them hell for me." The communication cut to static as explosions bloomed in the hangar bay. Jalen didn't look back. Couldn't look back. There would be time to mourn later if they survived. "Hegemony fighters incoming." Nyrixa reported, watching tactical displays with the eye of someone trained in fleet command. 3 squadrons closing fast. The courier ship was fast but lightly armed. Against military interceptors, their only advantages were speed and the growing chaos in Hegemony ranks. Jalen pushed the engines to their red line, weaving between exploding ships and debris fields. "They're falling apart," Nyrixa observed with grim satisfaction. The virus was working exactly as designed. Hegemony formations dissolved into individual ships, fighting separate battles, their perfect coordination replaced by deadly confusion. A destroyer tried to target them, but fired on its own support cruiser. Instead, its targeting systems corrupted by cascading quantum errors. The cruiser returned fire, and within seconds, both ships were locked in fratricidal combat. "Jump coordinates locked," Jalen announced. "We're clear of the gravity well." But before they could engage hyperspace, Nyrixa's sensors screamed a warning. "Multiple contacts, hegemony reinforcements dropping out of hyperspace." Admiral Corrin's main battle fleet had arrived 200 fresh ships with uncorrupted systems, led by the massive super dreadnought Iron Fist. The rebels were suddenly outnumbered 5-1. "Corvex is withdrawing," Nyrixa reported, watching the tactical display with royal composure despite the desperate circumstances. "He's achieved the objective. The Triumvirate's coordination network is destroyed, but he can't fight those odds." The Draxari fleet began its retreat, moving in perfect formation despite the chaos around them. They'd accomplished their mission. The genocide fleet was crippled, its AI brain virus infected and unreliable. "Jump to hyperspace," Jalen ordered, engaging the hyperdrive as hegemony fighters closed to weapons range. The stars elongated into lines of light as they escaped into the safety of hyperspace, leaving behind a battle that would change the balance of power in the galaxy. The Triumvirate still existed, but its perfect coordination was gone forever. 60 million Draxari civilians would live to see another day. But the cost. "He saved us all," Nyrixa said quietly, staring at the swirling vortex of hyperspace. "Kalen saved us all." Jalen's hands tightened on the controls. "Yeah, he did." In the medical bay, they found emergency supplies and a quantum communicator. Nyrixa activated it with royal protocols, sending a coded message to Admiral Corvex's "mission accomplished. Coordination matrix compromised. Kalen Strix died a hero." The reply came quickly. "Understood. All Draxari owe him a debt that can never be repaid. Return to safe harbor. The war is far from over." As their shuttle raced through hyperspace toward uncertain refuge, both survivors mourned the friend who had chosen duty over survival. Somewhere behind them, the hegemony was learning that even their greatest weapons could be turned against them by people willing to sacrifice everything for freedom. The balance of power had shifted. The real war was just beginning. The bridge of the retribution hummed with controlled urgency as Admiral Corvex studied the tactical display. 60 hours had passed since the Triumvirate operation, and the hegemony fleet was still reeling from the viral infection. Ship formations wandered aimlessly through space, their perfect coordination replaced by chaos. "Your Majesty," Corvex said as Nyrixa entered the command center Jalen closed behind. "The enemy is vulnerable. This may be our only chance to strike a decisive blow." Nyrixa moved to the central hologram, her bearing transformed from wounded refugee to commanding sovereign. The torture had left scars, but it had also refined her into something harder tempered steel where once there had been silver. "Fleet status," she asked with the crisp authority of someone born to command. 43 ships operational," the tactical officer reported. "The hegemony still outnumbers us, but their coordination is non-existent. Individual captains are making independent decisions, often contradictory ones." Through the viewport, the enemy fleet was visible as scattered points of light. Leaderless, confused, some ships firing on others, they mistook for rebels in the electronic fog of war. "The Triumvirate?" Nyrixa inquired. "Dead in space," Corvex replied with satisfaction. "Emergency power only. They're trying to purge the virus, but every attempt spreads it deeper into their quantum matrix. Captain Mordek is effectively commanding a 30,000-person prison." Jalen watched the tactical display with the eye of someone who'd spent years studying military strategy. "They're trying to regroup around Nexus Station. If they succeed, they might regain some coordination. Then we don't let them succeed." Nyrixa's voice carried the weight of absolute decision. "Admiral, you have the fleet. Destroy the Triumvirate and scatter their escorts. Show the galaxy that the hegemony's monsters can bleed." "Your Majesty," Corvex hesitated. "The risks are acceptable." Her golden eyes blazed with controlled fury. "That ship was built to murder children. Today we ensure it never serves that purpose again." The retribution moved forward, leading the rebel fleet in a spearhead formation that would have been suicide against coordinated opposition, but the hegemony ships responded sluggishly, their targeting computers still wrestling with viral corruption. From the command deck, Jalen watched the battle unfold with mixed emotions. Part of him thrilled at seeing the oppressors suffer the chaos they'd inflicted on countless worlds. But another part, the part that remembered being young and idealistic before war made him cynical, felt only sadness at the necessity of it all. Incoming fire from the dreadnought Dominator, the weapons officer announced. She's targeting our port flank. Return fire, Nyrixa ordered. All batteries. The Retribution's main guns spoke with voices of thunder, their quantum-tipped projectiles punching through the Dominator's shields like they were made of tissue paper. Secondary explosions bloomed along the enemy ship's hull as ammunition stores detonated. But it was the triumvirate that drew every eye. The massive command vessel hung in space like a wounded giant, its weapon systems offline and emergency beacons flashing distress signals that no one would answer. Captain Mordek's flagship, the terror of a dozen star systems reduced to helpless prey. Target the triumvirate, Nyrixa commanded. All ships concentrate fire. The rebel fleet responded with synchronized precision. 43 ships unleashed their fury on the vessel that had been designed to coordinate their extinction. Particle beams lanced across space like spears of light. Antimatter warheads detonated against reinforced hull plating, and quantum torpedoes burrowed deep into the ship's vitals. The triumvirate's death was magnificent and terrible. Internal explosions cascaded through its vast bulk as fusion reactors lost containment and ammunition stores cooked off in brilliant flashes. For a moment it became a miniature star, 30,000 lives snuffed out in an instant of purifying fire. It's done, Korvex announced as the debris field expanded. The triumvirate is destroyed. Jalen found himself thinking of Kalen, who would never see this moment of victory. The intelligence officer had died believing they might succeed, but he'd never know that his sacrifice had led to the destruction of the Hegemony's greatest weapon. The remaining enemy ships fled in disorder, their morale shattered by the loss of their flagship. Some surrendered their crews exhausted by weeks of preparation for a genocide that would never come. Others simply jumped to hyperspace without orders, abandoning the field to ships they'd once hunted like prey. The fleet is withdrawing, the sensor operator reported. We have the field. Nyrixa allowed herself a moment of satisfaction before turning to address the bridge crew. Signal all ships prepare for memorial service. We honor our dead. 3 days later, the rebel fleet gathered in the shadow of a nameless asteroid, far from prying eyes and hegemony sensors. Ships hung in perfect formation, a constellation of hope in the vast darkness. The memorial service was held aboard the Retribution in the main hangar bay, where representatives from every ship could attend. Holographic displays showed the faces of the fallen pilots who died in the battle, engineers lost to system failures, and prominently featured among them, intelligence officer Kalen Strix. Nyrixa stood before the assembled crowd, her voice carrying clearly through the ship's communication system to every vessel in the fleet. We gather not to mourn, she began, but to remember, to honor those who gave everything so that freedom might endure. Her gaze found Jalen in the crowd, and he saw something in her golden eyes that hadn't been there before. Peace, perhaps, or at least the possibility of it. Kalen Strix died as he lived, serving something greater than himself. For years, he carried the burden of serving a regime he despised, feeding us information that saved countless lives. In the end, he chose the hardest path, staying behind, so others might escape. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the assembly. But we honor more than his sacrifice. We honor his choice to believe that one person can make a difference, that conscience matters more than career, that doing what's right is worth any price. Applause rippled through the hangar, not the polite clapping of ceremony, but the heartfelt appreciation of people who understood sacrifice. Later, after the crowds had dispersed and the fleet had resumed its patrol routes, Nyrixa found Jalen standing alone on the observation deck, staring out at the stars. Regrets? She asked, joining him at the viewport. None about the mission, he replied, but I keep thinking about paths not taken. What if we'd found another way? What if Kalen hadn't had to? He made his choice, Nyrixa interrupted gently. Just as you made yours when you chose to rescue a broken queen from a torture chamber. You weren't broken, Jalen said firmly. Wounded maybe, but never broken. She turned to face him fully, and in that moment she wasn't a queen or a military commander, just a woman who'd found something precious in the darkest hour of her life. Do you know what you gave me? She asked. In that chamber when I was ready to die, you didn't just save my life. You reminded me what it meant to hope again. I didn't do anything special. Any decent person would have. No. Her hand found his fingers intertwining. Not anyone. You charged into hell for a stranger because it was right. Not for glory or reward or political advantage. Because it was right. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient light from distant suns carrying the dreams of countless civilizations. Some had fallen to tyranny. Others had risen to freedom. The cycle was eternal, but moments like this, when two souls recognized something precious in each other, made the struggle worthwhile. What happens now? Jalen asked. Now we rebuild, Nyrixa replied. We take the scattered pieces of my people and forge them into something strong enough to stand against the darkness. And we remember that sometimes the most important battles are won not by fleets or armies, but by individuals willing to risk everything for strangers. The hegemony won't give up. They'll adapt, find new ways to coordinate their fleets. Let them try. Her smile was fierce and beautiful. They'll face something they've never encountered before, a people who refuse to stay conquered, led by commanders who understand that true strength comes not from domination, but from protecting those who cannot protect themselves. As they stood together, watching the stars and planning for a future that remained uncertain, but no longer hopeless, both carried the knowledge that they'd witnessed something rare, the moment when the arc of history bends toward justice, pushed by ordinary people doing extraordinary things. The war was far from over. But today, freedom had won a victory that would echo across the galaxy, a reminder that no empire, no matter how powerful, could stand forever against the simple human truth that some things are worth fighting for. And sometimes that's enough. 6 months later, the gardens of New Draxa bloomed with impossible beauty beneath twin suns, their crystalline flowers chiming softly in the morning breeze. What had once been a barren moon in the outer rim now pulsed with life, terraced growing platforms ascending toward the sky, azure streams flowing between sections, and the distant spires of a capital city that proclaimed to the galaxy that the Draxari people would not merely survive, but thrive. Queen Nyrixa walked the central promenade with the measured grace of someone who had learned to carry hope as easily as sorrow. Her azure skin had regained its luminous quality, no longer dulled by torture and despair, and the silver circlet on her brow caught the sunlight like captured starfire. Beside her, Jalen Vos moved with the easy confidence of someone who had found his place in the universe. Gone were the hard edges and suspicious glances of the mercenary. He wore simple clothes, no uniform, no rank insignia, but the way palace guards nodded respectfully as he passed spoke to a different kind of authority. The hydroponics reports are encouraging, Nyrixa said, reviewing a datapad as they walked. Sector 7 is exceeding projected yields by 15%. The refugees from Corridin's system are settling in well, Jalen added, though some of the older ones are still having nightmares about the hegemony finding us here. They paused at an overlook where the gardens gave way to a view of the valley below. Temporary housing clusters dotted the landscape, geometric patterns of prefabricated shelters that somehow managed to look like art rather than desperation. Children played between the buildings, their laughter carrying on the wind, while adults worked in community gardens or attended skill-sharing workshops. 23 worlds now, Nyrixa mused, watching a transport shuttle descend toward the spaceport. The alliance of free systems grows every month. The hegemony's getting nervous, Jalen observed. Our intelligence network reports increased patrol activity along the core borders. Admiral Corrin's been replaced, apparently failing to stop a handful of terrorists was bad for his career. Good. There was steel in Nyrixa's voice that hadn't been there 6 months ago. Let them be nervous. Let them wonder which world will declare independence next. A group of children ran past their game, apparently involving pretending to be starship captains fighting space battles. One little girl, a Centaurian with pale blue skin, pointed at Jalen and whispered excitedly to her friends. He'd become something of a legend among the refugee populations, the human who'd saved their queen and given them all a future. Ambassador Chen's proposal is interesting, Nyrixa continued, returning to her datapad. Earth's Confederation wants to formalize diplomatic relations. They're offering technological exchange and mutual defense agreements. Humanity's good at making friends with the underdog, Jalen said with a wry smile. We've had plenty of practice being underdogs ourselves. They reached the Memorial Grove, a circular clearing where 43 crystal trees grew in perfect formation, each one representing a ship lost in the battle against the Triumvirate. At the center, slightly taller than the others, stood a tree whose crystalline branches caught and refracted light in patterns that seemed almost like encoded messages. Kalen would have liked this place, Jalen said quietly, touching the central memorial. He's here, Nyrixa replied. Every child who learns to read under these trees, every family that builds a new life on this world, he's part of that legacy. They stood in comfortable silence, remembering the friend who'd chosen sacrifice over survival. The morning light filtered through the crystal branches, painting rainbow patterns on the ground that shifted and danced like living things. There's something I need to tell you, Nyrixa said suddenly, her voice carrying a note of carefully controlled excitement. Jalen turned to face her, noting the subtle change in her expression, a softness that hadn't been there moments before combined with something that might have been nervous anticipation. The medical scanners confirmed it this morning. She continued, placing a hand over her stomach in a gesture so protective and tender that understanding hit him like a physical blow. You're, he began, hardly daring to voice the words. Pregnant. The smile that spread across her face was radiant enough to power a small city. Our child Jalen, human and Draxari, the first of what the geneticists are calling a new evolutionary branch. For a moment, the galaxy seemed to pause. The children's laughter, the gentle chiming of crystal flowers, the distant hum of construction equipment, all of it faded into background noise as Jalen processed the magnitude of what she just told him. A baby, he said wonderfully, as if testing the word. Our baby. The physicians say the genetic compatibility is remarkable. Nyrixa continued, her scientific training evident even in this most personal moment. Hybrid vigor, they call it. Our child will likely be stronger, smarter, and longer lived than either parent species. Jalen reached out tentatively, his hand hovering over hers before settling gently on her still flat stomach. Hello in there, he whispered, and Nyrixa laughed, a sound like silver bells in the morning air. The council is calling it a miracle, she said, a symbol of unity between species that were supposed to be incompatible. The xenobiologists are already requesting permission to study the pregnancy, and the political analysts are writing papers about the diplomatic implications. And what do you call it? Jalen asked, his gray eyes meeting her golden ones. Hope, she said simply. I call it hope. They walked hand in hand toward the palace complex, their shadows stretching behind them as the twin suns climbed higher. Around them, New Draxa hummed with the energy of a civilization being born. Refugees becoming citizens, temporary shelters becoming permanent homes, separate species learning to become one people. The hegemony will never accept this, Jalen said, his tactical mind already considering the implications. A human-alien hybrid child represents everything they oppose. They'll see it as an abomination. Let them, Nyrixa replied with fierce determination. By the time our child is old enough to understand hatred, there won't be a hegemony left to hate. Just free worlds united by the understanding that diversity makes us stronger, not weaker. As they reached the palace steps, Jalen paused to look back at the valley spread below them. Somewhere out there beyond the atmosphere and the protection of the defense satellites, the galaxy continued its ancient dance of politics and war. The hegemony still controlled hundreds of systems. Their fleets still patrolled space lanes with iron discipline, and their agents still hunted the rebels who dared to dream of freedom. But here on this small moon that had become the heart of something larger than any empire, life was taking root in ways that no amount of military force could prevent. Children grew and played, families formed bonds that transcended species barriers, and two people who had found each other in the darkest hour were about to bring new life into a universe that desperately needed reasons to hope. You know what the historians will say about all this? Nyrixa asked, following his gaze to the stars that were just becoming visible in the darkening sky. That we got lucky. That sometimes, she said, her voice carrying the weight of prophecy, it only takes one reckless human to change the fate of a galaxy. Above them, the stars wheeled in their eternal patterns, carrying the light of distant suns to worlds yet undiscovered. Some of those worlds would fall to tyranny, others would rise to freedom, and still others would find their own paths between order and chaos. But on this world at this moment, two people stood together beneath an alien sky and felt the first stirrings of a future that neither empire nor ideology could contain. In a universe vast beyond comprehension, they had found something infinitely precious, each other, and the promise of tomorrow growing within them. The galaxy would remember this day, though it would take historians decades to understand its true significance. It was the day when hope stopped being just a word and became a living thing, small and fragile as a heartbeat, but destined to grow into something that would reshape the stars themselves. And in the end, that's all any of us can ask, for the chance to plant seeds that will grow into forests we'll never see in gardens, we'll never walk under suns that will shine on children, we'll never meet but whose freedom we help secure. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that changes everything. And that's how one human's refusal to abandon hope sparked a revolution that would echo across the stars for generations. Captain Jalen Vos proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a fleet or a virus. It's the simple human truth that some things are worth fighting for no matter the odds. If stories like this give you chills and make you believe in the power of human determination, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell, because we've got dozens more tales of humanity rising against impossible odds. From soldiers who saved entire civilizations to rebels who toppled galactic empires with nothing but courage and clever tactics. This channel is your gateway to the greatest humanity stories ever told. Subscribe now and let's explore together what happens when ordinary humans do extraordinary things among the stars. Until next time, remember, never underestimate a human with nothing left to lose.